Welcome to Love This, the weekly podcast where we discuss the business of creativity, culture, and innovation. We're your hosts, me, Beth O'Brien.
And me, Joe Carter. We'll be talking to the people who are responsible for what we, the advertising industry, see. Welcome to the Love This podcast by Colenso BBDO. Andrew, thanks so much for joining us on the show. How's it going?
Good. Real pleasure to be with you.
Oh, it's awesome to have you here. To kick off with, we tend to ask people this question. Given the name of the podcast, what is the this that you currently love? It can be anything.
I guess I don't know whether love accurately describes it, but I am completely addicted to something called Soul Cycle.
Yes.
Yeah,
I know it.
completely addicted. You do?
Yes.
Okay. I now try to restrict myself to no more than 5 a week.
Whew.
And I love it because I think you may have seen a presentation I used to do about, it was called Sex, Drugs, Rock and Roll in Advertising, and it was all about how emotion drives effect in advertising, and in particular, two molecules that can be stimulated by different types of experience. One is oxytocin, not to be confused with Oxycontin, and the other is, oh God, I've forgotten what the other one. What do you get from cigarettes? Dopamine, there you go, dopamine. Yeah. And what happens in Soul Cycle is you are in a dark room with 60 other people on bikes, with nightclub quality sound, a really, really brilliant instructor who's kind of part coach, part performer, part preacher, and you ride your bike all together to the beat of the music. So in a good class, all 120 legs are completely synced up with each other, and then you move around and do all sorts of moves on it. And because of that, it stimulates vast amounts of dopamine and oxytocin, because you've got the energy and confidence that comes from loud music and accomplishing something and doing something with your exercise, and then you have this incredible sense of community and belonging because you're with this bunch of people for 45 minutes doing something in sync. And I think that's what makes it completely addictive. But I've just completed my 1,220th ride.
Jeez.
Wow.
So I guess that qualifies as something I love.
100%. It feels like a bit of a coordinated rave on bikes that's good for you. I mean, it sounds great.
That is exactly what it is. Exactly what it is.
It doesn't actually sound that different to how I feel when I hear good ideas. I often talk to people about how they feel when they either experience an idea or have a good idea, and it's very similar. It's very similar to that.
That makes sense.
Yeah. I think it's probably a good place to start to discuss rolling back the clock a little bit to the beginning of your career. And I was...
That's not a little bit, that's a lot.
It's a lot, I know. And Joe and I are well aware that you've spent multiple years in almost every role there is. So you started in media, you've done some creative. I know that you actually began a long, long time ago doing 100 calls a night selling life insurance. Even. Mm-hmm. But I guess our first question is that diversity of experience, I guess how's that helped you climb the ladder and become one of the most successful advertising leaders ever? Joe earlier was talking about you being the LeBron James of advertising. He's a big fan. Okay. And would you recommend, I guess, this to people in the industry today? Like, I guess we're talking about the generalist, expert versus specialist debate.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing I should just qualify is I never actually had a stint when I was paid to be creative. Right. I have on occasion lobbed in ideas, and once or twice in my entire career they haven't been dismissed with something other than contempt. So that bit I haven't really done. But I think that when I started, I was a media planner. And what that gave me very early on was exposure to clients and the need to present and explain my rationale for a particular recommendation in as compelling a way as possible. And I think that, that kind of core skill was instantly transferable to account management and new business, which I then spent a stint doing. I think my new business time was significantly influenced by the time that I spent when I was a student, when, as you say, I used to sell life insurance. And, I learned from that if I didn't make 100 calls on a Monday night, 100 cold calls on a Monday night, I wouldn't get 10 appointments for the week. And if I didn't get 10 appointments for the week, I wouldn't get 3 sales. And if I didn't get 3 sales, I wouldn't have enough money to live the life I wanted to live, which was a lot of fun and very exotic. But the same is true in new business. Unless you pick up the phone and make the calls, you don't get the meetings. If you don't get the meetings, you don't get the invitations to pitch. If you don't get the invitations to pitch, you don't get the conversions. And that kind of discipline to it, I think, is something I did pick up from selling. And I also think that you learn that it's on you, because I could sit there on a Monday night with the phone book on the phone, and we've all felt this thing where you just, I'll just go and get another cup of coffee, or I'll just do. If you did that, you didn't make the call, you didn't get the meetings. And there's only one person who can make those calls, and that was me. So I think I learned a lot from that. I think as it relates to the world today, I think what you need is people. What's great is if you can be ambidextrous, and I think that's slightly different from being either not the same as being a generalist. And I think LeBron actually is ambidextrous. I think he can shoot with both hands equally well. But I think you need to be really, really good at something and really, really good at something else. And you can do that. We can all learn enough about any of the specialisms to be good enough. Because I think if you do that, then you have the credibility to be an effective generalist leader, as opposed to if you can only do one thing.
And so that sales role that you started out in for an insurance company that then led to being passionate about new business, is that something that you were excited to take responsibility for, or is it something you were looking to share responsibility for? I think one of the things I've encountered is you have to create a culture of new business for it to be successful and to empower people to share that responsibility, but ultimately you need the one person that drives it forward. What's your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I don't think it has to be one person. But I do know that it doesn't happen unless somebody picks up the phone. And there's that wonderful thing about the description of teamwork, which is the story of 4 people: somebody, everybody, nobody, and anybody. And they were given a task to perform, and anybody could have done it. Everybody thought somebody would do it, and in the end, nobody did. And I think that's the risk with spreading responsibility too thinly. It always runs the risk of being the number 3 thing on everybody's list rather than the number 1 thing on somebody's list. And I'm talking there specifically about prospecting, not so much once you get into the pitch stage and conversion. That's obviously something that needs a full team. But when it's just trying to get into somebody's consideration and getting those first meetings so that you've got somebody to talk to, that needs to be somebody's number 1 job.
Yeah, true. And I think, so breaking down those barriers to getting the first meeting, there needs to be some fuel for conversation, which is often either the challenges the client's facing or the challenges that the industry's facing. And I think kind of everything has changed, but nothing's changed. And I'm keen to get your viewpoint on I guess if you could pinpoint one global macro challenge that both we as a network and an industry are facing, what do you think it is right now and why?
I think the preparing ourselves for the flip from a model predicated on mass media to one built on precision media, addressable media, preparing ourselves for everything that we need to do differently in order to be successful in that world is, in my view, the biggest single challenge we face. Because when you switch from trying to find, assuming you're going to find some of your audience in the middle of some demo or segment that you bought, to a world where you know enough about individuals, you don't know who they are, but you know enough about what they motivates them, what they like, what they don't like, how they behave, to be able to build up meaningful, valuable audience segments out of those individuals and then address messaging specifically to each of those segments at specific moments along a customer journey. You have to plan differently, you have to create differently, you have to produce differently, you have to measure and test differently. And we're going to need to be ready to do that at scale across, 73 countries and 1,200 clients at some point in the next 18 months to 2 years. And I don't know when or where it's going to happen, but I know that it will. And it's not going to take 3 years.
Man, how do you begin to tackle something like that at a global level?
Well, you start by recognizing that there's no point in hiring a wizard who can do it, because wizards don't scale. You have to start from the assumption that we have very good people, very smart people. Most of them will put the work into learning to do something new if you can help them do that. So, because that's the only way you can do it at scale. So you have to put some very smart people together and then design both the process and the kind of training programs that you're going to put enough people through in order to create that kind of capability at scale, which is what we obviously need. And that's, we kicked that off in February of this year, and it's, I'm really reasonably happy with the progress that we're making around the world. There is a chicken and egg thing. There's no point in people knowing something that they can't apply, but we've got to be able to prepare them for something that they're going to be able to apply at the end of the course.
Yeah, true. But it's a really free-range chicken. Like the opportunity for it is almost endless, and I think it's fascinating. You kind of talk about the understanding of the customer, and to me, it's unprecedented, but also absolutely necessary when you move into a precision marketing world, an addressable world, and a voice-activated world, etc. When it comes to your decision making, does that excite you? That level of insight that you can have over people before you've even met them, or do you prefer to run with your gut, with your instinct? What feels good.
No, I find it fascinating learning about people, and I find it can be very dangerous. You can have hypotheses that come from the gut, but I think it's smart to try and you need them because you can't do any of these things without hypotheses. But I find it very satisfying when you can validate them through an analysis of data. And I also, I did a lot of maths when I was a student, maths and Latin. So I love logic and precision. I also love magic and creativity, but I love logic and precision, and I love the fact that this can all be done at scale that none of us ever imagined would be possible. So the clever bit is designing the processes and having the hypotheses. The kind of grunt work of validating them, which used to be so hard, is now not, and it's getting easier and easier. And I find that really exciting.
And as you're talking as well, we had interviewed the wonderful Layla Fatah quite early on when we started the podcast, and she spoke a lot about the more that this happens and we're targeting different communities, how important it is that there's an honesty to the voice from those communities. She was talking about basically getting more diversity into the building, into the creative, because if we're trying to create work for specific groups, then that work has to come in some way from the voice of those specific groups. I guess.
I'm not sure I totally buy that argument for the need for diversity. I totally believe that a diverse and inclusive agency will be a much better one and will produce much better work. But I don't think it's because it's representative. I think it's because it's diverse.
Yes.
And I think what that brings you is people who, because they come from a different place to the place I come from, will see things in a different way to the way I see them, will ask questions that I won't have considered asking, and will have thoughts and ideas that I might not have considered, because we're all, to some degree, prisoners of our upbringing. If you ask, one of the joys of data is it means that you can't just go on your own hunch. But the big joy of diversity is that you're not going to be surrounded with people who are likely to have the same hunches as you. And just having that level of curiosity, that level of question, that level of challenge, that's how we get to much better and brighter thinking and much better work.
I think I read somewhere that you had said the statement that I thought was really interesting, which was experimentation over testing. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that that's, again, one of the beauties of the world that we're moving into, is that we can experiment a whole lot more and test a lot less. And because the beauty of an experiment is you have a hypothesis, you test it, you see if things happen the way you thought they were going to. If they do, you do it again and do more of it. If you don't, you adjust something, change it. See if you can. You may have to change the whole hypothesis. You may just have to change the way you executed it. But I think this is a much, much more reliable way of finding out how you can improve efficacy than asking people questions, because for a whole series of reasons, people don't always tell you the truth. Not because they're nasty and malicious, but sometimes just because they don't know. Whereas if you experiment and see what actually happens, the result is the result.
That experimentation fascinates me, especially from the creativity and magician or wizardry side rather than the rational logistical side. I think, you need a perfect balance of both. And we'll come to the work and the industry and the network, but for you specifically, to get to where you are now, I imagine you'll have taken some certain kind of calculated risks along the way. And I mean, like, when we sell solutions that are a little bit more audacious, we're asking our clients to risk their career and our reputation. We had a chat with Fernando Mercado at Burger King a few episodes ago, and he leaned into this big time. But I guess, in your experience, what is, if you could pinpoint it again, what's the biggest risk that you've taken, and were there any learnings from taking that risk?
Yeah, there's two things I'd say. One is I learned a massive lesson about this. I had a huge aha moment in a conversation I actually had in Australia with the former CEO of National Australia Bank years ago, after the Melbourne agency had done a fantastic campaign called The Big Breakup, which was predicated on the the insight that consumers thought the big four banks were all in cahoots with each other and working together to, you know, screw the customers. And they did this wonderful campaign, which was, it started on Valentine's Day, and they said, you know, we're through. It's over. We're breaking up with you. It's not us. It's you. We're fed up with you lying, you're cheating, and all that stuff. And it was a wonderful idea, very well executed, performed brilliantly, won a Grand Prix, won an effectiveness Grand Prix. Really amazing campaign. And I went to see the CEO, and I said to him, you know, before we start, that was a really, really bold, that was a real bold thing you did. And he looked at me and he said, what are you talking about? And I said, well, you know, breaking up with the other banks in public. And he said, you're out of your mind. That was his exact words. He said, I'm a banker. I'm not paid to be bold. I'm paid to manage risk. And when your guys presented that idea to me, I mentally calculated the downside. And I figured that the worst that could happen is that we'd be laughed at for 3 weeks. I might have some tricky moments at the golf club. We may be the butt of humor on late night television. But in 3 weeks, another story would come along and take care of it. And during that 3 weeks, I didn't think we'd lose a corporate client or a retail customer. And on the basis that I could live with the downside, I went for it. And it was a big aha moment for me, because what I realized is that we don't have to ask people to be bold. We have to ask people to manage risk. And if you concentrate on qualifying and quantifying what the actual downside is, it's often nowhere near as bad as we fear, because we don't actually do that exercise. What we do is we spend a lot of time trying to figure out what the upside might be. But there's a probability quotient attached to the upside that nobody really knows. But usually the downside, you can actually do a pretty good job of qualifying and quantifying. And if you can do that, then it makes it a lot easier. Makes it a lot easier to take that leap. So I think I would say, in general, one of the things we should be focused on is identifying and managing risk, more than just being, quotes, bold. But the thing to watch out for, which is not that, is the pursuit of certainty. There's an awful lot of what you see that is pretending to be risk management is in fact the pursuit of certainty. And the inevitable consequence of the pursuit of certainty will be the average. The more you pursue certainty, the closer you will get to the norm. So I think we should manage risk, not pursue certainty. In terms of my own the biggest risk I took, when I took over as CEO of BBDO Worldwide, and I knew obviously it was going to happen a little while before I did do it, but I knew I needed to make a very significant change to the creative leadership in BBDO New York. And this was a very successful agency with a very established creative reputation and some very established creative leaders. But I was convinced that that we needed something different for the next 10 years than that had worked as well as it had for the previous 10. And 4 days after I took over as global CEO, I announced that I was getting rid of the chief creative officer in New York and hiring David Lubas to take his place. And that was a really, really risky move. It cost us business. We lost Diet Pepsi almost immediately, and subsequently the whole of the Pepsi brand, because the individual that I got rid of was actually tightly connected to the Pepsi client. So that was a risky thing to do, and in the immediate aftermath looked like it was going to be one of my dumbest decisions, but actually it was not. It was right, and I've ended up having a fantastic partnership with David for 15 years, and he was able to bring exactly what I thought we would need in the years that were coming. but it would have been very easy to talk myself out of it.
Super interesting. I think Joe and I would love to actually hear a little bit more about your leadership style. I know that when you're at someone of your level, it might not quite be the right question to ask around what you were just saying about confidence. But it occurs to me that to lead in a way that doesn't pursue certainty and to constantly be dealing with that edge of risk. I'm really interested to hear about one, I guess, your style of leadership, but two, I guess your relationship to confidence. And now you're right at the top. Do you still? What is your relationship to confidence? How does that work for someone who's like way up there, for lack of a better term?
Wow, that's a good question. I mean, I think that, well, first of all, I think you got to have a clear picture of what you think leadership is, and the best definition I've heard of it was actually a couple of weeks ago from Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, who said, "Great leaders are people who bring energy and focus to places where there is none." And I thought that's really smart, because you don't lead leaders adding energy where there already is some, and you don't need leaders focusing on things that everybody is already focusing on. What you have to do as a leader is find the things that should be focused on that aren't being, and bring real energy to that. I think it is really, really important to do two things. One is to make decisions, but to recognize that there aren't any perfect decisions. So, typically you're looking at a particular situation, you say, well, I've got three options, A, B, and C, and you go through the pros and cons of A, the pros and cons of B, the pros and cons of C. You conclude that the best answer is B, and you go, okay, I'm going to do B. And that's a good thing to do. That's the right decision. And it's good to make that decision. It's good to make it fast. But what you have to remember is it's not perfect. And as people who sell for a living, what we can find ourselves doing is convincing ourselves that the decision that we took, which is the right one, is perfect and everything else is terrible. And that's not true. There were things in A that are missing in B, things in C that are missing in B, and there were things in B that are problematic. So the real trick is make fast decisions, preferably make the right decisions, but recognize that they're not perfect, and work out how you're going to add the things that are missing, surround it with the things that are missing, and mitigate the risks that are inherent in that decision. And I think you've got to think that through, and not let it stop you making the decision, because it's the right thing to do. But don't be blind to it. Don't think that the decision is going to be perfect.
Yeah, wow.
I think attitudinally, you have to learn to love problems. You have to learn to love problems. You have to see a problem as the opportunity for you to do something great and smart and make the right decision. Because if you don't, you will just be swallowed and sink into a kind of horrible fog of problems. Because what happens with you when you're a leader is you get a lot of problems. That's what people bring you. I think you have to come to terms with the fact that you will disappoint somebody every single day. You will be pushing people out of their comfort zones. You're always going to be caught in the middle. You're always going to know things that you can't tell people, and you will make mistakes. But that's the kind of context you have to accept as the reality of the world, and then get on with it. I think in demeanor, the only acceptable demeanor is what I call plausible optimism. People need to see and feel plausible optimism, not blind optimism. Nobody's fooled by blind optimism, but plausible optimism is the only way you can behave, and you have to be like that all of the time. Kind of when we refer in our people values to radiators, not drains. I think to be an effective leader, you really have to be a good radiator. I think you have to be an insulator, not a lightning rod. You will find yourself under extraordinary pressure, and you have to absorb that pressure and protect your team and the people around you from that pressure, not be a lightning rod that just passes it on. Because if you pass it on, the whole organization will feel the same level of pressure, which it shouldn't, because it won't be able to perform as well as you need it to if it does. And I think then recognizing the wonderful teaching of Omnicom University in the war between strategy and culture eats strategy for breakfast. You have to remember that as a leader, you need to build a particular culture. You need to have a clear idea of what it needs to be and nurture it daily, forever, because that ultimately is going to be the thing that will always win. I don't know if I've answered your question.
No, there's
That's
some
brilliant.
invaluable traits that you've listed there. The couple of things that kind of come to my mind was when you were talking about decision making that is rarely ever perfect. I think if it was perfect, we'd be living in a pretty mundane world. And that's why I love the idea of progress over perfection. But when you're talking about plausible optimism, I get that sense from the majority of people we speak to on here. And I'm curious, I guess, when we look in a world of mindfulness and I guess just general self-awareness, how do you maintain your energy, passion and creativity for the business and constantly have that plausible optimism that you talk about, and then how do you switch off?
Okay, so I think there are a couple of bits to that. One is by surrounding yourself with people who can help radiate. There's a reason why we say we want radiators, not drains, because I think that energy is infectious, and I think the more people you have around you that have it, the better. I think part of it is frankly just being aware of how you are behaving and therefore feeling and seeming to the people around you. Just being aware of that and recognizing the impact it will have on other people if they see your head drop and your shoulders sag and your feet, drag. You may not even know that you're doing it, but the people around you are going to see it, feel it, absorb it, and turn it into something worse. And if you're aware of that, when you have those moments, because we all have them, we all have moments where we want to just shove your head in your hands and shake it. You don't. You can't. You save that for somewhere else. So I think consciousness in that sense is very important. I think that you constantly reminding yourself, which I do, of what it is you really love about this business. Even in its darkest moments, you can find something. You can remind yourself of what it is that you love about it. That helps. And then I think I told you Soul Cycle has a big part of keeping me sane, just because it's 45 minutes when I can't possibly think about anything else and just am in a different place. Both David Lubars and I both learned to do transcendental meditation about 5 years ago, and we're not brilliant at it, but both of us, I think, probably do it once a day. You're supposed to do it twice. We both do it once a day most days. And I think that does help. I think that helps just to create some space in your day that helps you reset. I think that helps. and then the rest is just down to red wine.
When you were talking there about, finding and reminding yourself about what you love about the business, it reminds me of the BBDO mantra, the work, which we should talk about. And I'm a creative director now, and I remember arriving at BBDO as a junior, and I'd gone from a place that probably wasn't the work. I didn't realise it, but it wasn't creatively led. And I remember stepping into the hallways of Colenso BBDO and feeling the full force of what it meant for an agency to champion the work. And I guess I want to know, from a creative point of view, it's easy because my whole job is simply about the work, right? And my colleagues who are wonderful in the account service department, they've got the added difficulty, right, where that's not always easy when they've got to manage client relationships in order to really be work-led first, creatively led first. How do you keep that at a global level, the real focus of what we do as BBDO? Because a lot of people talk about mantras, etc., but my experience has always been that BBDO really, really live that. And you've been a big part of cultivating it, so...
Yeah, I think, the first thing is it starts from a place of utter conviction. There's that, people talk about having the courage of your convictions, which is kind of ironic because if you really have conviction, it doesn't take a load of courage. But I and we have an absolute, unshakable conviction that creativity and great work will deliver disproportionately large returns for our clients. And therefore, it is the most important way in which we can add value to their business, which in turn adds value to ours and differentiates us from our hundreds of competitors. Ours is a very unusual business. Most categories you operate in, there's like 3 brands and a private label. There are hundreds of agencies. So having some meaningful point of differentiation is really important. So you start with that conviction, and then the simple truth is you have to just live it every single day, everywhere. And this isn't, like you said, everybody talks about the importance of creativity and that being at the core of what they do and stuff. But just, and because you'd kind of be an idiot to say it doesn't matter and that something else matters more. But there's a big difference between saying it and meaning it. And when you mean it, it drives your decision making. Not just the big decisions, but there are thousands and thousands and thousands of moments a day where there's a 50-50 decision that could go one way or the other. And if you're serious about being committed to the work, you go with path A rather than path B. And it doesn't always work, and sometimes you can't do it. But unless that's your going in, principled position, you won't get to the level of consistently good work across, in our case, 73 countries that we aspire to and, seem to deliver reasonably on most of the time. But it's an absolute commitment. And it isn't just one big thing. That's important. I was like, work is like, if you think of it like a glass of water that you're walking across a disco floor in the days when there were discos, it's very easy to spill little bits of it as you're being bumped across the floor. And by the time you get to the other side, you've suddenly only got a quarter of a glass. And what you have to do is find a way to, you're not going to get through without spilling any, but to spill as little as possible. And maybe hold that glass above your head as you walk through rather than at your waist.
True. I think I was around when school discos were still a thing.
Me too, bro. Me too.
I think the way that works...
That's very kind of you.
I think the way that work shows up in the world and in terms of the business growth it drives for our clients is great. We have a yardstick within the industry that BBDO Worldwide continue to kind of dominate, I'll say, but top, which are the global creativity and effectiveness rankings. In my head, there's several agencies who do phenomenal work that drive business growth for their clients. That's some of the most creative things you'll see, but they don't enter shows. What do you think, in your opinion as a global CEO of BBDO, is the relevance of these rankings to our clients and the talent that we're looking to keep and hire around the world? And do you think it's still the best yardstick to measure our collective contribution to the industry?
It's a good question. I feel a bit like, I think it was Winston Churchill who said that democracy was the worst system on earth apart from all the others. And I feel like, awards shows are terribly flawed, but we don't have anything else. And so if we are serious about measuring our creativity versus our peers and the rest of the industry, they at least provide some kind of peer evaluation that is hard to get any other way, and some kind of benchmark of how we rate and rank creativity. So I think they're imperfect and at times incredibly frustrating and irritating. But I don't have any other way of showing what we're doing relative to the others. And I think that what is important is that we aim to dominate creative awards, effectiveness awards, and where they exist, strategic thinking awards. Because if you put the three together and you dominate all three, then I think there's a high degree of probability that what we're doing is good and working. And so they're a priority for us. I think they do. I don't know if it's the awards, but the work that gets seen, it's because they're awards, that does help us attract great talent. No question of that. And I believe, my observation is that they've become more important to clients rather than less over the last 10 years. I see more clients being interested in how their brands are performing in both creative and effectiveness awards, not versus other agencies, but versus their competitors. It's become rightly something that more and more clients, I think, are paying attention to.
Yeah, totally wonderful. I know Joe and I both know that you're a busy man who needs to no doubt get to other things. But right. Just last question that we always wrap up on that would love to hear from you on is speaking earlier about that change that the industry is already has started to undergo and will continue to for the next 3 years. Yeah. What's your advice to someone who's coming up the ranks through that change, and what advice would you give to them?
Well, that wasn't the question I thought you were going to ask me, actually. I thought you were
really?
going to ask me. Yeah, after that lead up, after the, is there any great work that's coming out of that process was where I thought you were going to go. So I'm going to answer both my question and your question.
You go for it.
Yeah, I think that when it comes to the advice I would give people, I would say just be curious and make a point of learning everything that you can, because whatever it is that you're currently exposed to is not going to be the whole story tomorrow. And the people who I see succeeding at every level are the people who are taking the time to learn about the stuff that isn't on their desk, not just the stuff that is. And I also do believe that a lot of if you can be bothered to ask, it's not difficult to find help and teach yourself. The barrier isn't the availability of the help. The barrier is the willingness to ask. And to me, that's just been one of those things that I think people need to lift their heads, look around, see what it is they don't know about, and go and learn about it. Because at some point that's going to be a big advantage to you. The second bit, which is I wanted to just give an example of what I'm talking about when I say, all of these data-driven customer journeys that are mapped out with fabulous detail, and none of them really matter if at the end of that you don't create really magical, moving experiences at each of those points along that journey. And the best piece of work I've seen in the last 6 months, bizarrely, was a text message that I got from American Airlines. It was in August. I was in LA and I was due to come back to New York for a meeting on the following day, and I got a text message, and the text message said, "You may want to pack an umbrella."
Brilliant.
Isn't it?
It's very good.
And it went on and said, "We're expecting heavy rains in the New York area tomorrow. Delays are probable, cancellations possible. If you possibly can, you may want to consider flying on a different day." And it was so brilliant because it charmed me.
Yeah.
Charmed me. Didn't just disarm me, it charmed me with really bad news.
Yeah.
So you need the technology, you need the software, you need all of that to know that I was going to be on a flight the next day, what my telephone number is, so you could automatically send me a text message. But without somebody having the ability to craft something that magical and that charming, it would have just been information. And instead of getting angry when I received this bad news, I smiled. And I thought, well, that's nice. And more than that, the next day I took the flight, and it was indeed horribly delayed, and we got diverted, and I ended up spending 3 hours on the ground in DC without being able to get off the plane. And I didn't get mad. And I was sitting and I was thinking, is the reason I didn't get mad because I was so brilliantly charmed and told to expect this yesterday? And I concluded the answer it was yes. And if you think of how huge that emotional swing could have been, and how it was completely and utterly taken care of by a text message, you've got one truly brilliant piece of writing.
It's amazing, eh? Such simple delivery in terms of the right place, right moment, right person.
So all of that can be done with machines, but no machine is able to come up with, you may want to pack an umbrella.
That's the difference between meeting expectations and exceeding them. Like that one text.
Yeah,
it's
it's
brilliant.
Crazy.
Thanks so much.
So, that's it.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining us, Andrew. It's been phenomenal to have a chat with you. And thanks for time.
Been a lot of fun. See if you can improve it by February. Thanks,
awesome.
guys.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks,
Thank you so much.
See ya.
All right, you too. Cheers.
What we'll do is a really classy outro. Love this.
By Colenso BBDO. It's going to sound amazing.
And we'll just land the plane.